Welcome to this week's midweek space startup news. And as usual, I'll cover some space news I found on websites, blogs, and social media posts. So first of all, let's bring up this banner. We're on X at Space Startup Hub, and I post links to my videos on X and occasionally some other stuff as well. So follow us on X, and let's get into the first article this week, which I saw. And this is on Vast Space announcing a large docking adapter standard. So let's read this article first. And you can see it there in the image. So I've just highlighted a few sentences. So it says Vast, the company developing next generation space stations. If you're not familiar with Vast Space, they're working on the Haven 1 module that should launch in 2027. This is a minimal viable product space station. It's a single module, perhaps something like 45 cubic meters. It has 10 payload slots, and it can accommodate up to 4 crew for about 4 weeks using a Crew Dragon. So Vast Space will be developing a Haven 2, a larger stretch version, and that will be for the commercial LEO destinations program. I think the whole commercial space station program is now up in the air. I don't think it's viable. NASA doesn't think it's viable. But putting that aside for the moment, let's just read the article. So they've developed the large docking adapter, and Vast plans to open source its interface. So there's a video, and we'll watch the video in a moment, but let's just first read the article. So future space stations will use larger modules, and this docking port is for docking with the next generation of bigger crewed vehicles. So that would be the Starship. They hope to encourage the industry-wide collaboration and accelerate the development of interoperable space systems. And they say it supports from 2 to 20 plus module structures, including module-to-module connections for scalable station architectures. They also mentioned about large crewed vehicle-to-station docking. That would be, for instance, Starship docking with one of these modules with a large docking adapter. They say this large docking adapter allows any two compatible vehicles or modules to dock without predefined active-passive roles. The system includes a soft capture system with petals, latches, and 6 passive actuators. And we'll watch the video in a moment. You can see the different components. They also have a hard capture system with alignment pins, 12 powered bolts, and redundant androgynous pressure seals. And this adapter is 30 times more rigid than the international docking adapter. Interested parties can either purchase the docking adapter from Vast, or they can manufacture their own using the open source adapter interface user guide. So that is the article, and that's very interesting. We do have some images from the article we just read, so you can see the operation specifications. So it's got retro reflectors, latches, hard capture, powered bolts, passive actuators, and petals. And we have this image here, so you can see you've got 2 modules, and then you've got this large docking adapter connecting the 2 together, and you can see crew moving some large piece of equipment through the adapter. So let's watch the video. This was posted on the X account. So large docking adapter, you can see that it's much larger than a person, 6.6 square meters of space, actuators, petals, latches, 12 hard capture powered bolts, pressurized opening diameter up to 2.9 meters, and you can use it to dock 2 modules together with an opening area of 6.6 square meters, 13 times pressurized opening area, and bulky equipment can be moved through the modules, and you can dock with a large vehicle, Starship for instance. 30 times more rigid, and you can just chain all those modules together. And there's a render. 2 Starship-like vehicles and all those modules. And there's hardware as well. So there you go. That looks amazing. So that is the first article from Vast, but there's another article that we'll read next. Okay, moving on to our second story on Vast Space. They were at the 41st Space Symposium last week. This is on Vast Space's website, so let's just read what they're saying. Vast at the 41st Space Symposium, showcasing our progress towards launching Haven 1, which is their minimal viable product for space station that should be launching next year in 2027. Scheduled to be the world's first commercial space station. So last week, the Vast, so when was this? 21st of April, so yesterday, Last week, the VAST team attended the 41st Space Symposium. Our payload partner, Yuri, secured a contract with the European Space Agency for flying research on Haven 1. Haven 1 has 10 payload slots. I believe 5 or 6 of them are filled at this point. So there are a few payload slots that are available still. They're more than half filled. So the CEO of VAST Space, Max Hout, said they are discussing the future of commercial space stations, and VAST is ready to deliver a continuous human presence in space for the US and its allies. In this section on real hardware on display, there's a 3D model roadmap illustrating our hardware-rich stepping stone approach to building Haven 2, our continuously crewed space station and proposed successor to the International Space Station. So the ISS is scheduled to be deorbited by 2032, if not sooner. And before it's deorbited, it will be decommissioned. There'll be no crew on board. And then a decommissioning vehicle built by SpaceX will dock, and the thrusters will fire to send it into an orbit where it will burn up in the Earth's atmosphere, probably over the Pacific Ocean. The number of years left for human habitation of the ISS is rapidly reducing. It's at most 6, but probably 4 or 5. So future VAST missions will include the use of SpaceX IVA, that's Intra-Vehicle Activity Suit, during launch and landing. So IVA suits are used inside a Crew Dragon or capsules or within the space station. They're not suitable for spacewalks or moonwalks. Further down, we have talking about the VAST astronaut flight suit. The suit is designed for use on board pressurized space stations and for daily use in orbit. And further down, we have, here. So this is the CEO, Max Hout, speaking on the future of commercial space stations. I'm not sure there is a future, but let's read what he has to say. He's discussing the future of commercial space stations. VAST is ready to ensure a continuous human presence in low Earth orbit for the US and its allies with its next generation space stations. So he's referring to the Haven 2. And further down, we have Yuri. Yuri will deploy its space taxi platform, you can see it there, as a lab as a service solution for ESA, the European Space Agency, on Haven 1. We remain focused on completing the integration of Haven 1 at our headquarters ahead of conducting a suite of system environment tests at NASA's Neil Armstrong Test Facility later this year. That is the article from VAST Space, and we do have a few images from their booth at the 41st Space Symposium. So there's the booth. You can see there's an Axiom spacesuit, then you've got the flight suit, the IVA suit there. And then we have on the wall, you can see the Crew Dragon on the left, and then it's docked to the Haven 1. This is their minimal viable product space station, maybe 45 cubic meters, and that can support up to 4 crew for maybe 4 weeks, something like that. And then you can see here the Haven 2 modules on the chain together. There's actually 4 of them chained together. Each Haven 2 module has at least 2 windows. You can keep docking them together, and you end up with a very large space station. So also there we have the flight suit. That's what it looks like. And this image we saw from the article, this is Yuri slotting into one of the 10 payload slots. You can see, I think this is Interstellar there. You've got JAMS, which is a Japanese company working on life sciences. I believe Redwire will also have payloads on board Haven 1. So let's talk about the future of International Space Station. So we know it will be splashed down 2032. So everyone, NASA and ESA, are looking about what to do post-ISS. So ESA, the European Space Agency, is running a study right now on post-ISS options. So they have 3 scenarios. 2 of the scenarios, scenario 1, scenario 2, assume that our commercial LEO destinations in orbit. So scenario 1 is no European infrastructure, just rely on the CLDs, the space stations. Scenario 2, which is baseline, is limited European infrastructure added to commercial space stations, maybe docking an extra module or some hardware on the outside or something like that, but still reliant on commercial space stations. And the third option, which I hope ESA goes with, is a European initiative for LEO outpost. So this is a European-led space station. So no dependency on commercial space stations, no dependency on the US, a pure European-led space station with international partnerships, probably including Canada and Japan. And I did a video last week on that. The reason I think ESA will go that way is because NASA just pivoted. I did a video earlier this week on this. They pivoted away from independent commercial space stations. They don't think there's enough private demand, which means NASA would have to fully fund them. They don't have the money. NASA has $250 million for commercial space stations per year. That's nowhere close to what's needed. You need $2 to $3 billion per year. The International Space Station, I think, is $3 to $4 billion. So with some savings, maybe $2 to $3 billion. But certainly $250 is nowhere close to what's needed. I don't think NASA will have the money. So they're pivoting to this core module, which will be added to the forward port of the ISS, and then commercial vendors can slot their modules into this core module. And at some point when the market demand increases, they can separate and have a free-flying space station. So this forces commercial space stations into making a pivot. They can either, one, stay the course, continue to develop their International Space Station, get funding, get partners, and so on, or they can pivot to align with NASA, in which case they have to fundamentally redesign their space station, no longer be independent. It must be able to dock with the ISS. It has to match the orbit of the ISS. So that's perhaps a complete redesign of their space station, which will cause massive schedule delays and massive costs. Everything will have to be requalified, retested, and redesigned. So this is the impossible choice that NASA has imposed upon commercial space stations. My opinion is this is the end of space stations in low Earth orbit, at least for the US. I don't think this approach is going to work at all. The future is pretty bleak when it comes to commercial space stations, in my opinion. So let's move on to the next story. Okay, our next story is on an article in PJ Media, and it says the space launch industry is in big trouble, except for you know who. So it goes on to say, New Glenn mission on Sunday put a $30 million AST Space Mobile cellular satellite into the wrong orbit. Bluebird 7 is so low that it lacks enough onboard fuel to boost itself to its proper orbit and will have to be deorbited as a total loss. The mission was a failure. New Glenn is likely grounded for 4 months. So in the meantime, ULA's Vulcan workhorse, which is a replacement for Atlas V, is grounded following 2 Northrop Grumman solid rocket booster failures. Space is too big and too important for the United States of America to have just one reliable launch provider. Well, that's not actually true because Rocket Lab has Electron, but obviously that's a very small launcher. So it's not a replacement at all for the medium and heavy launchers from ULA and Blue Origin. ULA's busiest year was 2016, that's 10 years ago, with a total of 16 launches. And it goes on to talk about the troubled Vulcan Centaur rocket. It's launched just 5 times in 2025 and is currently paused, while Northrop Grumman works out issues with the solid rocket boosters after a decade of development and transition. SpaceX conducted 165 Falcon 9 launches in 2025 with a 100% success rate. We shouldn't have to rely on a single reliable launch provider in what's supposed to be America's grand new space age, but just look at the competition. Yeah, I mean, that's the case. It's not good. I mean, it looks like the whole of the American space sector and economy is held up by SpaceX. Let's move on to the next story. Zeno Power. So let's just read the article here, and this is on their website. Zeno Power completes final design review for space nuclear battery to power lunar missions. Zeno Power today announced the successful completion of the final design review for its space nuclear battery, NASA's Harmonia radioisotope power system for Artemis Tipping Point program. It delivers 3.5 times the original specified power output and advances the program into build and fabrication phases. And this battery will be qualified for lunar missions beginning in 2028. And we have a quote from Zeno Power. Our design delivers the continuous power needed to transform lunar missions from 2-week sprints into long-term operations. We're building the power infrastructure that could enable a permanent moon base, unquote. NASA recently announced that radioisotope power systems are part of the agency's plan for establishing a sustained lunar presence and building a moon base. The nuclear battery is capable of integration with commercial lunar landers, positioning Zeno to support the growing commercial lunar economy, enabling missions for a range of customers. So that is the article from Zeno Power. And we have an image. So you can see an Intuitive Machines lander there and a nuclear battery. The idea is that the battery keeps the lander warm during the lunar night, which can last 2 weeks. And then the lander can revive during the lunar day when the sun comes back up. Potentially with more advanced systems, not only do you get heat, you get electrical power. So the lander could actually function over the lunar night. But that would be more advanced systems. Have a look at this graphic from one of my previous videos. You can see the potential radioisotope materials that could be used. So Zeno Power is currently working on using strontium-90, which is a strong emitter. But its half-life is only 28 years, which means every 28 years, you lose half the fuel, which means you lose half the thermal heat. It's abundant and it's pretty cheap. NASA is more interested in Americium-241. If you look at the half-life, it's 432 years, which means these systems will last for many, many decades or even centuries, will generate reliable, stable thermal heat, and maybe a small amount of electricity for a very, very long time. So that's very interesting. And finally, we have some information on the Canadian Space Agency. So let's read those. So this is from Olga Nestorova. And she says, Canada signed General Security of Information Agreement with the European Space Agency, removing a key barrier that had limited Canadian firms' access to ESA programs. That means more room for Canadian companies to compete for contracts, join advanced research and development, and plug into major international supply chains. So that's the first piece. And then we have this from Stephen McKinnon. And he says, today we introduced the Canadian Space Launch Act. This legislation will deliver sovereign space launch capabilities to Canada and help create a new $40 billion space launch industry in Canada. We've reached the moon, but now we can launch Canadian rockets from home. So that's two pieces of information about Canada. What some people may not realize, and I'll bring up this graphic, is that this is ESA, the European Space Agency, and you'll notice in the left corner here, you've got Canada. Canada is an associate member, I think it's called cooperating member of the European Space Agency, which means they can take part in ESA projects. And now with this latest signing, they can now take part in highly classified, sensitive programs, which means more business for Canada and more capability for ESA. Anyway, thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.